Hello guys, last video was on the classical model. Let's look at Keynesian today. As you can see, I've actually plotted out the basics. It's a little messy, but it still works. And as you can see, quite different from the classical model. Probably the first thing you notice is when it comes to supply, you have a much different shape, and there's also just one aggregate supply line. The other thing that you'll probably notice is YFE. These are on both Keynesian and classical, and they mean the same thing. So quick reminder from last class, this is referring to full employment, right? And when we say full, we're not actually talking 100%, we're talking about 96%, because we have things like frictional unemployment, where people are in between jobs, or you have structural unemployment, where people's job skills just don't match what's out there in the market. So in fact, about 4 to 5 is ideal, because let's say like Japan, when you're like at 97.8 or something, or 97.5%, this is actually considered too high. You actually want a certain level of unemployment, which is for a healthy economy. Now, let's look at each step. And as we speak about Keynesian, it's good to kind of reflect on how it's different from classical, because keep in mind, this was in response essentially, right, to the classical economics. And the name comes from John Maynard Keynes, right? And Keynes' big thing was the government needs to intervene in order to help people lives, essentially, right? Because keep in mind, with the classical model, the economy self-corrects. But as Keynes famously said, in the long run, we're all dead. So what he's trying to say there and criticize is, in the long run, there is no long run if people are dying because, they don't have food, if kids are starving, and in some way, shape, or form, we need the government to come in. And in this case, it was in the 1930s, right, the Great Depression. And he's saying, look, we can't wait for a self-correction. By then, it's too late. So quick reminder too, with this YFE, this is talking about things like the full potential. If you remember PPC, it's kind of a similar idea with that, right? What is, a nation's population? What is a nation's type of population, right? Like, is it a lot of skilled people? Is it unskilled laborers? What type of land do they have? Can they get natural resources? If they discover natural resources, it goes to the right. Or maybe they deplete the resources they have, then it goes to the left. We have things like technology. I'm running out of space here. Put a little arrow there. We got things like tech. We got things like capital stock. A variety of things can impact YFE to the left or the right. And that is the same with classical and Keynesian. Now, let's talk about step-by-step what happens with the 3 ADs, aggregate demands we have here. And a quick reminder of what aggregate demand exactly is. If you remember right from last time's video, AD is the exact same calculation as it is for gross domestic product, right? Cigarette XM, C plus I plus G plus exports minus imports. And boom, we have the same calculation for AD and for GDP. Now, what can shift it right to the left? We'll get to that in a second when we actually see the shift. But for now, let's start with, I guess, what we can call here. We'll just call this point 1. Point 1, GDP's low, right? The prices are low, sure, but we're not at the fullest potential, right, which is way over here. There's this massive gap between what should be capable versus where we're actually at. In other words, our potential output is much larger than our actual output. And this is where the Keynesian philosophy takes place. They're saying, look, we have these buildings that are being unused. We have these, not all of our labor force is used, right? Unemployment is at 35%. So how the heck can we set this economy back on track? Well, in order to shift this aggregate demand rightward, government can take some actions. Keynesians would say, in order for this to happen, we have to increase C. Maybe we can do things like cut interest rates, right? Increase spendings. Maybe we can cut income taxes. Maybe we can do things like for I, we could cut business taxes. Maybe we can lower interest rates for businesses as well. For G, we can do things like get rid of our austerity measure. Let's go ahead and engage in big government projects because those projects help hire people. When people are hired, more people are working, unemployment goes down. And finally, we can increase our exports. How can we do that? Well, we've lowered our interest rates already, right, to increase C and I. Lower interest rates means our currency is weak. And just to illustrate that, so for example, we'll say US dollar. If the US dollar is $1, let's say for 100 yen, so that's Japanese currency, if the exchange rate goes, if the exchange rate of the dollar gets weaker because of low interest, well, in that case, $1 now equals 80 yen, right? The Japanese can get more bang for their buck. With 100 yen, now they can get like $1.20. So what does that mean? More people in Japan are buying Teslas, they're buying Apple products, right? Exports are increasing now for Americans with their weak currency. So let's say we do get here now. We'll call this point 2. At point 2, what has changed? Well, the prices have gone up just a little bit, just a tad bit, but GDP has gone up massively, right? It's gone up massively. And why is that happening? Because the government intervened. But more importantly, why is the price the same, right? One pivotal difference with classical and Keynesian. In classical, when we see aggregate demand shift to the right, just when we see aggregate demand shift to the right, what happens? Yeah, we have more GDP, but price goes up, right, from here to here. Now, with Keynesian, we have managed to raise GDP with very little increase in price. And the theory here is because there's no inflationary pressure. What do I mean by that? Well, when we're moving along the curve from here to here to here, we still have decent unemployment, right? We still have extra resources. I need to go buy, a place for my business to, a new floor in a building. Well, there's a bunch of floors that are open. So I'm not competing for prices. I need to hire an extra accountant. Oh, there's a bunch of accountants who are unemployed, right? There's no inflationary pressures yet. And then we get to this point. Now at 82, we go to, let's say, 83 now. So let's say the government continues to make policy that's very business and consumer friendly, at least when it comes to increasing GDP. But now, although we are seeing an increase to GDP, right, we're now at our fullest capacity. Notice that, we'll call this point 3. At point 3, the prices have now gone up a whole lot, right? In other words, we have inflation. Now, come back to inflation in a second here, but the first thing to recognize is unlike 1 to 2, where there weren't inflationary pressures, as we climb from 2 to 3, what's happening is the job market is getting saturated. I need to compete to pay people more. Things are getting more expensive, right? If I have a restaurant that sells beef, well, maybe back here there was, let's say steakhouse. There was 10 steakhouses in the city. Over here now we've got 15 steakhouses in the city. Now we've got 20 steakhouses. The competition is different than when we were at 10. And that means people are competing for the same product. That pushes up inflation, right? It's competition, especially with wages. So now we have inflationary pressures building and we are at maximum capacity, right? We are at YFE. And kind of a bonus that I like to add is, well, what happens? Well, it's really 2 points, although I'm kind of getting ahead of myself into maybe perhaps the next unit. But why the heck then would certain countries want to create AD? It's not even fitting on here, but AD4, right? AD4, because with AD4, we're just getting more expensive prices, right? Everything costs more, but we're not necessarily producing more than we did before. We'll call this P4. And there's actually a reason to this. One of the reasons is governments may try to push this point because they're optimistic about the AS, the aggregate supply, right? The aggregate supply, maybe they're changing immigration law. Places like Singapore, places like the UAE, they are optimistic that they can get even more skilled laborers to come to their country, right? And more skilled laborers, that would mean the aggregate supply would shift, right, to the right. So obviously it's a little messy, but you can kind of imagine, right, you can keep going that way with aggregate supply. And that way, even if aggregate demand continues to shift right, in theory, you could have a lower equilibrium. So that's just an extra point I wanted to add. Usually you just see 3 aggregate demands there, but I think it's important to understand why countries will do that, and they'll continue to have business-friendly, let's say, for example, corporate tax cuts, or that have business-friendly interest rates. Now, keep in mind that this does eventually lead to, as you can see, inflation. And with inflation, keep in mind, as I said last time, there are pros and cons, right? Pros would be things like it would encourage spending and investment since money loses value over time. It also does things like it reduces the burden of debt. So for example, if I had borrowed money when the economy was still down here, let's say I borrow $1 million. Well, let's say we actually do end up here. Well, I'm still paying off the $1 million I borrowed at this point, right? Even though I'm making money now at this point. So that would be quite awesome, right? Whether it's a consumer or a business. At the same time, though, it creates uncertainty, right? Let's say the gap from here to here is in 1 year. Consumers are now worried. Are we going to be here in another year? Are we going to be way up here in another year? If you remember hyperinflation, that's a good word to know, right? We'll add a little hyper to there. Hyperinflation is when there is inflation of 50% plus for more than 2 months. And we've seen it happen, right? We've seen it transpire in places like Zimbabwe, Argentina. If we go way back, the Weimar Republic, right? What used to be Germany in the 30s. That's also not a good thing. So hopefully the big picture you're left with now is kind of contrasting, right? This model of classic versus Keynesian. And the biggest difference, right, in ideology is basically the government's role, right? The government can help pull people out of these recessions without compromising major inflationary pressures. Not only that, but Keynes would go as far as to say we need the government to help push us, right, in the right direction. I think one of the commonly used metaphors is that of starting the engine of a car, right? You need that little spark to start that engine, but once the engine gets going, then the car can run on its own. Obviously, in this case, the car is the example of the metaphor for the economy. So on that note, I think those are the major points I just wanted to cover for today. I know it got quite a bit wild here with these pictures, but again, when we go step by step, hopefully you understood what was happening here. And yeah, that's it for today, the Keynesian model. For those who have the test tomorrow, yeah, hopefully this classical and Keynesian videos will contribute to a decent review, as well as I put 100 questions up on Cognity. And that's it for me. Thank you guys, and that's the Keynesian model.